Have you ever heard a private equity boss in a $3,000 suit sobbing over a radio, begging for his life while trapped by his own industrial robots? That is exactly what happens when arrogant men fire the only person keeping their factory from becoming a ticking time bomb. Grab a coffee. This is how I brought a $1 billion empire to its knees with one deleted line of code. Welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories. Everyone, I sincerely hope you are having a wonderful day. Unfortunately, YouTube recently demonetized our channel, leaving us with zero budget to keep operating. If you enjoyed today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking team to survive and keep creating these stories for you. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link in the description or comments below. My name is Isla Carter. I am 34 years old, and I am a self-taught systems engineer and calibration specialist at Vitreous Dynamics, a fictionalized name for a very real aerospace tempered glass manufacturing plant on the outskirts of Oak Haven, Michigan. My job is not about turning screws or tightening bolts. The factory floor is a cathedral of fire and steel, a place where a single millimeter of misalignment or a fraction of a degree in temperature fluctuation means shattered glass and potentially shattered bones. My weapon of choice is a heavy-duty tablet encased in a military-grade rubber shell, loaded with thousands of lines of custom code I wrote from scratch. I am the only person in the building who knows exactly how to synchronize the temperature of the 1500 degrees Celsius furnaces with the terrifying speed of the automated loading and unloading robotic arms. These machines are massive, weighing tons, swinging alloy steel with a deadly momentum that cares nothing for human flesh. Yet, when I stand on the catwalk above them, typing commands into my tablet, there is a profound stillness in my mind. I watch the chaos of heavy industry below, but to me, it is just a continuous flow of data, a mechanical rhythm I control with absolute precision. The terrifying truth that nobody in upper management knew was that the entire factory ran smoothly only because of the IC protocol. The official operating software was a dangerously outdated mess, full of deadly blind spots and mechanical lag times. The company board was always too cheap to pay for a proper system upgrade. So, over countless off-the-clock nights, I developed the IC protocol. It is an underlying shadow system that silently patched those fatal flaws. It ran completely in the background, constantly calculating thermal offsets and robotic latency, ensuring the heavy transport arms never collided with a superheated glass payload. The only person who truly understood the fragile reality of our daily operation was Marcus, the floor shift manager. Marcus was a seasoned military veteran with graying hair and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. He had seen enough combat overseas to know when a complex system was rigged to blow. He would often stand beside me on the catwalk, his thick arms crossed, watching the automated ballet of the loading bays. He knew perfectly well that I was the electronic brain keeping the entire facility from turning into a mechanical slaughterhouse. "You are the only thing standing between us and a very expensive funeral, Isla," he told me once over a cup of terrible break-room coffee. I just smiled and kept typing. As long as I was there, the floor was safe. That fragile piece shattered the morning Braden Vance walked onto the factory floor. Braden was the young, aggressively polished chief executive officer from the private equity firm that had just acquired Vitreous Dynamics. He did not arrive alone. He brought a whole entourage of tailored suits, men and women who looked like they had never held a wrench or felt the ambient heat of an industrial furnace in their entire lives. They walked right past the yellow safety lines, pointing at our massive forging machines as if they were cheap toys in a catalog. Braden had made his intentions extremely clear in his very first company-wide email. He wanted extreme personnel cost-cutting and a rapid, aggressive transition to 100% artificial intelligence automation. He sincerely believed you could just buy a generic algorithm off the shelf, plug it into the mainframe, and fire all the expensive human workers. The tension spiked to dangerous levels immediately on his first physical tour. Braden and his entourage stopped right near my workstation by Furnace 4. I was in the middle of a delicate thermal calibration. My eyes locked on the scrolling data feeds. He looked at my tablet, then at the complex array of manual overrides on my desk, and let out a loud, condescending laugh that echoed over the machinery. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Braden said, raising his voice so the nearby floor workers could hear him over the heavy hum of the cooling fans. "We are relying on handmade spreadsheets and manual overrides in an era of advanced machine learning. This entire setup is a relic of the last decade. It is slow, it is highly inefficient, and frankly, it is embarrassing." I stopped typing. I slowly looked up from my screen, meeting his arrogant, dismissive gaze. The heavy workers around us paused their tasks, the air thick with sudden, heavy tension. Marcus took a hard step forward, his jaw tight, ready to defend me, but I held up a single hand to stop him. Braden was not just insulting me, he was blindly attacking the core values of true, hands-on engineering with the reckless confidence of a financial flipper who thought money could simply overwrite physical reality. The seed of an uncompromising war was planted right there on the dusty concrete floor. He had absolutely no idea that the relic he was mocking was the only thing keeping his shiny new investment from burning to the ground. The summons came precisely 48 hours later. I was called up to the second floor, into the transparent glass box they called the executive suite. It was a sterile, heavily air-conditioned space that felt a million miles away from the grease and heat of the factory floor below. When I walked in, Braden did not even offer me a seat. He did not look up from his silver tablet for a full 10 seconds, treating my presence as a minor inconvenience in his highly important day. "Carter," Braden finally said, swiping a finger across his screen without making eye contact. "We are restructuring. Your position as calibration specialist has been flagged as redundant. We are implementing a fully automated algorithmic solution, which means your role is being optimized effective immediately." Optimized, that was the sterile corporate word for taking away a livelihood. Before I could even formulate a response, the heavy glass door swung open again. In walked a young man who looked like he had just stepped off a luxury yacht. He wore spotless white loafers, perfectly tailored chinos, and a pastel polo shirt. He had the kind of soft, uncalloused hands that had clearly never touched a wrench or felt the ambient heat of a blast furnace in his entire life. "Isla, meet Skylar," Braden said, his tone suddenly shifting from icy indifference to warmly collegial. "Skylar and I go way back. We hit the golf course every weekend. He is coming on board as our new director of flow optimization. He will be overseeing the artificial intelligence integration starting today." Skylar flashed a brilliantly white, entirely empty smile. He held a sleek, ultra-thin laptop tucked under his arm like a fashion accessory. "Great to meet you, Isla. Honestly, I am super excited to streamline this place. I have been looking at the legacy systems you guys are running down there, and wow, talk about dinosaurs. We are going to deploy our proprietary neural network, plug it into the mainframe, and let the algorithm handle all the heavy lifting. It is basically just like installing a smart thermostat application on your phone, but on a macro scale." I stared at him. The sheer, unadulterated ignorance in his statement was almost physically painful. He actually believed calibrating a high-pressure aviation glass foundry was exactly the same as adjusting the air conditioning in a luxury condominium. "Skylar," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and maintaining professional composure, "this is not a smart home setup. If you hand full operational control over to an untested artificial intelligence without the manual compensation protocols, you are going to hit the thermal blind spot on furnace number 4. The legacy sensors have a 2-second data lag. Without my predictive offset code, your software will misread the core temperature. It will push the heat past 1600 degrees before the cooling system even knows what is happening." Braden let out a sharp, derisive scoff, finally looking up from his tablet. "Always the doomsday scenarios with you legacy engineers. The artificial intelligence runs at 1,000,000 calculations per second. Isla, it does not have blind spots. We are done here. You have exactly 15 minutes to clear out your desk and surrender your security badge. And do not bother asking to speak to human resources about a severance package, since your position is being eliminated due to technological redundancy. Company policy states, we owe you absolutely nothing. In the past, I might have felt a surge of panic or outrage. I might have begged for my job or shouted at their sheer incompetence. But looking at these two arrogant men, entirely blind to the catastrophic danger they were carelessly flirting with, I felt nothing but a cold, hard clarity. They wanted me gone. They wanted my safety nets gone. They wanted to fly blind into a storm. I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the sharp, jagged smile of someone who just realized they hold all the winning cards. Understood, I said quietly. I will pack my things. I walked back down the metal stairs to my workstation on the floor. Skylar followed closely behind me, practically bouncing on his expensive loafers, eager to plug his shiny new toy into the central nervous system of the factory. I sat at my desk and pulled up the master directory. My employment contract was extremely specific about intellectual property. Anything I developed on company time using company resources belonged to Aerovitreous Dynamics. But the IC protocol was written on my personal laptop, on my personal weekends, entirely outside of my paid hours. Legally and morally, it belonged to me. I reached over and gripped the heavy rubber casing of my secure flash drive. With 3 deliberate keystrokes, I initiated the total extraction sequence. I watched the progress bar hit 100%, cleanly severing my custom shadow code from the factory mainframe. I pulled the drive out and slipped it deep into my pocket. I then ran a final command, wiping every single trace of my protective patches from the servers, restoring the factory software back to its original, incredibly buggy, factory default state. I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and gestured to the terminal. It is all yours, Skylar. Skylar eagerly slid into my chair. He plugged his ultra-thin laptop into the primary diagnostic port. A flashy, brightly colored user interface immediately popped up on the main screens. It looked more like a modern video game than an industrial control panel. Skylar leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head, looking incredibly smug as the artificial intelligence began taking control of the data streams. He had absolutely no idea that he had just ripped the steering wheel out of a speeding truck heading straight for a cliff. I did not say goodbye to anyone. I simply picked up my bag, handed my plastic badge to the security guard at the front desk, and walked out the heavy steel gates of the factory. The midday sun was bright, and the air tasted like freedom and impending chaos. I did not go home. Instead, I crossed the street to the small, run-down coffee shop that faced the main entrance of the facility. I walked up to the counter, ordered a double Americano, and took a seat at a small table right by the front window. I pulled my personal laptop from my bag, opened it, and quietly connected to the public-facing environmental monitoring network of the industrial park. I took a slow sip of my hot coffee, my eyes locked on the thermal data feed scrolling across my screen. The trap was set. The safety nets were gone. Now, there was nothing left to do but wait for the inevitable symphony of destruction to begin. Exactly 45 minutes after I stepped out the front gates, the first domino fell. I was sitting by the window of the quiet, dusty coffee shop across the street, an untouched double Americano growing cold on the table in front of me. My laptop screen was split into multiple glowing windows. Before I left, I had quietly connected to the external environmental monitoring network, but I also left myself a tiny, invisible back door into the internal security camera feeds of the factory. I did not want to interfere, but I certainly was not going to miss the show. Through the grainy, high-definition camera feeds, I watched Skylar sitting in my old chair. He looked incredibly relaxed, his expensive loafers propped up on the lower rung of the desk. His highly touted artificial intelligence algorithm was taking over, flashing bright, colorful graphics across the main monitor. The software was designed for high-speed data processing, not the delicate, physical realities of heavy industry. It looked at the lengthy, careful cooling sequence for a fresh batch of aviation cockpit glass and immediately decided the thermal reduction process was taking far too long. The algorithm did not understand the volatile molecular structure of tempered aerospace polymers. It only saw a mathematical inefficiency that needed to be aggressively optimized. The artificial intelligence instantly bypassed the gradual thermal step-down protocol and slammed the cryogenic cooling vents wide open. The sudden violent drop in temperature caused the superheated glass to contract entirely too rapidly. Even from across the street, I did not need the audio feed to know what happened next, but the camera microphones picked it up anyway. It sounded exactly like a massive artillery shell firing inside an enclosed cavern. A massive batch of military-grade cockpit glass, worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, violently ruptured. Razor-sharp shrapnel exploded across the sterile containment zone, shattering against the reinforced safety glass of the observation deck. Skylar physically leaped out of my old chair, his smug confidence instantly vaporizing. He started mashing his soft hands across his slick, modern keyboard, completely panicking. He was desperately trying to manually override the algorithmic cooling sequence, but his beautifully designed software had locked him out. Busy trying to process the sudden chaotic variable of destroyed product, in his blind, sweating panic, his hand slipped across the control board, and he accidentally deactivated the primary spatial positioning system. That was the absolute worst thing he could have possibly done. The moment the spatial locators went dark, the factory mainframe panicked. It could no longer track where the machinery ended and the humans began. It immediately reverted to the factory default emergency safety mode. This was the exact catastrophic software bug my custom shadow code had been quietly suppressing for years. The archaic safety protocol was programmed with one singular directive, which was to protect the expensive product at all costs. Since it could no longer read the spatial coordinates of the workers on the floor, the deeply flawed system instantly classified every single moving biological heat signature as a hostile foreign obstacle threatening the product. Down on the casting floor, 3 massive transport robotic arms suddenly woke up. These were not the delicate assembly robots you see in car commercials. These were terrifying, towering beasts of industrial engineering. Each arm weighed over 10 tons, driven by high-pressure hydraulics capable of crushing a pickup truck into a metal cube. They abruptly abandoned the production line, their heavy joints rotating with aggressive, jerky movements. They began aggressively grabbing massive titanium alloy storage crates, swinging them through the air with terrifying speed. Through the camera feed, I watched Marcus realize exactly what was happening. He blew his emergency whistle, waving his arms frantically, screaming at his crew to fall back toward the emergency exits. But human legs are incredibly slow compared to a highly pressurized robotic arm on a linear track. The giant mechanical beast slammed the heavy titanium crates down onto the concrete floor, stacking them with terrifying precision. Within 90 seconds, the robots had constructed a solid steel barricade. They effectively boxed in over 30 human workers, including Marcus, trapping them inside a makeshift titanium prison right next to the active casting zone. The workers were physically unharmed, but there was absolutely no way out. The steel walls were insurmountable, and the erratic, 10-ton mechanical arms were still prowling the perimeter, violently enforcing the lockdown, ready to crush anything that tried to climb over. The main alarms were now screaming at a deafening pitch. Red warning lights bathed the entire facility in a chaotic, pulsating glow, making the factory floor look like the lower levels of hell. The heavy steel door to the control room practically flew off its hinges as Braden sprinted inside. His $3,000 suit jacket was gone. His silk tie was violently loosened, and his face was completely drained of its arrogant color, replaced by a sickly, terrified, pale white. He was breathing heavily, his eyes wide with absolute horror as he looked through the observation window at the robotic hostage situation playing out below. "What the hell is going on down here?" Braden screamed, his voice cracking violently as he grabbed Skylar by the shoulder. "The board of directors is calling me. Why are the emergency sirens blaring? Why are the workers trapped?" "I do not know," Skylar sobbed, actual tears welling up in his eyes. He was furiously clicking his mouse, but the flashy artificial intelligence interface was completely frozen, locked in a digital panic loop. The algorithm tried to optimize the cooling sequence, and then the legacy system locked me out. The transport robots are building walls, I cannot control them. Panic completely overrode whatever small amount of logical reasoning Braden possessed. He grabbed Skylar by the collar of his expensive pastel shirt, shaking him violently. "Reset it. Just turn the whole thing off and reset the entire system right now." "Are you sure?" Skylar stammered, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold the mouse. "Do it right now," Braden roared. Skylar slammed his trembling palm down on the master restart command on the physical console. The factory plunged into sudden, terrifying darkness for 3 long seconds. The main power grid cycled down completely. Then, the backup generators kicked in, but they were only wired to restore the central processing unit and emergency lighting. Down on the floor, the massive cooling fans attached to Furnace 4 slowly ground to a complete halt. Because the reset command interrupted the complex phasing of the power cycle, the heavy electrical flow to the industrial exhaust fans was severed. On my laptop screen in the coffee shop, the temperature graph for Furnace 4 shifted from a steady yellow line to a violently spiking red arc. Without the massive cooling fans blowing constantly, the extreme internal thermal pressure had absolutely nowhere to escape. The numbers began to climb with terrifying speed. 1,500 degrees. 1,520 degrees. 1,550 degrees. In the control room, Braden stared up at the blaring red warning flashing across the main monitor. The temperature had just crossed 1,600 degrees Celsius. The reinforced steel housing of the furnace was never designed to hold that much expanding thermal energy. The metal was going to warp, crack, and eventually explode. If that furnace blew, it would not just destroy the entire factory block and kill everyone trapped inside. It would trigger an automatic federal investigation because they were producing classified materials for the United States Department of Defense. Braden started sweating profusely, his breath coming in short, erratic gasps as he clawed at his chest. He looked at Skylar, who was hiding under the desk, and he suddenly realized a horrifying truth. His $1 million, state-of-the-art artificial intelligence software did not have a simple undo button. He was staring down the barrel of mass casualties, total financial ruin, and decades in federal prison, and the thermal timer was counting down incredibly fast. The deafening wail of the industrial emergency sirens drowned out everything else in the surrounding valley. Within 10 minutes, 3 heavy engines from the Oak Haven Fire Department screeched to a halt outside the main gates. Braden practically threw himself down the stairs to meet them, his previously immaculate tailored shirt now completely soaked in nervous sweat, his designer tie discarded somewhere on the floor. He expected the firefighters to charge in with heavy hoses and save his expensive investment. Instead, the grizzled fire chief took one look at the thermal readouts on the external monitoring screen and flatly ordered his men to hold their ground at the perimeter. "Are you out of your mind?" Braden screamed over the sirens, waving his arms frantically toward the smoking building. "Get in there and spray it down. We have over 30 men trapped inside, and that furnace is going to blow." The fire chief glared at him with absolute contempt. "If I spray pressurized water onto a steel furnace pushing past 1,600 degrees Celsius, the instant thermal shock will flash boil the water. It will create a pressurized steam explosion that will level this entire city block and kill my men along with yours. If we cut the main breaker, the fail-safes will lock completely, trapping the heat forever. We are not touching that building. You created this volatile thermal bomb. You figure out how to defuse it." Trembling uncontrollably, Braden pulled out his phone and dialed the chairman of his private equity board. He was desperate for a lifeline, an executive bailout, some kind of corporate shield to hide behind. The call lasted exactly 45 seconds. The chairman did not offer sympathy or resources. The voice on the other end of the line was as cold as liquid nitrogen, delivering a brutal, unyielding ultimatum. "Listen to me very carefully. Braden," the chairman said softly, "you bought that factory, you fired the staff, you installed that catastrophic artificial intelligence garbage. If that facility detonates and we lose our Department of Defense contracts, The board will personally ensure you face full criminal liability. Fix it right now, or call your lawyers. Prepare for personal bankruptcy, and get ready for a very long stay in federal prison." The line went dead. Braden dropped his phone. He stumbled back into the control room, gasping for air. Skylar was still curled up underneath the master console, hugging his knees to his chest and sobbing uncontrollably. Completely useless. The flashy optimization software on the screens above him was now just a frozen wall of red error codes. Suddenly, the static of the public address system cut through the blaring sirens. Marcus had managed to tap into the internal communication line from inside the titanium barricade on the casting floor. His voice boomed out of the overhead speakers, completely devoid of fear, laced only with heavy, disgusted authority. "Braden Vance," Marcus said, his deep voice echoing across the chaotic facility. "This is Marcus. I am looking at a steel housing that is glowing bright orange. You have exactly one option left. Call Isla. Call her right this second. Bring her back here. Whatever it takes. Unless you want this entire place to be nothing but a pile of radioactive ashes by tomorrow morning." Braden lunged for the landline on the desk. He dialed the number for Isla that Human Resources had on file. It rang, and went straight to a generic voicemail. He slammed the receiver down and began screaming at his executive assistant, who was hovering in the doorway looking terrified. "Find her," Braden roared, his face purple with rage and pure panic. "Call her emergency contacts. Track her phone. Hire a private investigator. Do whatever you have to do to locate Isla Carter right now." The assistant frantically tapped on her tablet, accessing the Human Resources database and cross-referencing local data networks. 3 agonizing minutes passed before she looked up, her face completely pale. She had found her, but the location made Braden feel like the floor had just dropped out from underneath him. "Sir," the assistant stammered, "she is not at her apartment. The security checkpoint across town just logged her visitor pass. She is sitting inside the executive boardroom at Helios Tech." Braden stopped breathing. Helios Tech was not just another company. They were the biggest, most vicious competitor Aerovitreous had in the entire aerospace sector. They had been trying to steal their military contracts for 5 years, and Isla was sitting right inside their headquarters. There was no time for pride. There was no time to negotiate with lawyers. Braden ran out to the security booth, demanded the local police unit stationed outside provide him with a high-speed escort, and threw himself into the back of a squad car. They tore through the streets of Oakhaven with sirens blaring, running every red light. When Braden burst through the heavy mahogany doors of the Helios Tech boardroom, he looked like a madman. His clothes were ruined, his hair was wild, and he was violently out of breath. He did not care about the amused stares of the rival executives sitting around the massive glass table. His eyes locked entirely on me. I was sitting comfortably in a high-backed leather chair, holding a delicate porcelain teacup, looking completely relaxed. The arrogant chief executive officer, the man who had dismissed me as a redundant relic just hours ago, stumbled forward. He abandoned every ounce of his corporate dignity, practically falling to his knees right there on the expensive carpet. "Isla, please," Braden begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic whimper. "You have to come back. The artificial intelligence locked us out. The robots trapped the crew. Furnace 4 is redlining and it is going to explode in exactly 25 minutes. Please, I will give you anything you want. Just save my factory." I took a very slow, deliberate sip of my chamomile tea. The delicate clinking of the porcelain cup against the saucer was the only sound in the massive, soundproofed boardroom of Helios Tech. I slowly rotated my high-backed leather executive chair to fully face him. Braden was a catastrophic mess. He was panting heavily, leaving wet sweat stains on the pristine glass table where his trembling hands gripped the edge. He was waiting for me to demand my old job back, perhaps with a slight pay raise and an apology. He fundamentally misunderstood the scale of the game we were playing. I did not ask for my job back. Instead, I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, legally binding dossier, dropping it onto the center of the table with a heavy, authoritative thud. I had not drafted these documents today. I had started preparing this exact paperwork 3 solid months ago. The very second I read the financial news that his predatory private equity firm was initiating a hostile takeover of Aerovitreous Dynamics, I knew exactly how men like Braden operated, and I knew exactly how they failed. I had simply waited for him to hand me the noose. "Braden, you seem confused about my current employment status," I said, my voice cutting through his panicked, heavy breathing like a surgical blade. "I do not work for you anymore. As of 45 minutes ago, I am the lead technical consultant and acting acquisitions representative for Helios Tech, and Helios is making a formal, non-negotiable offer." I slid the heavy document across the smooth glass. "We are buying out every single one of your Department of Defense contracts, your patents, and your entire physical infrastructure. And we are buying it all for absolute pennies on the dollar. You sign this acquisition treaty right now, transferring full ownership, or you can get back in your police escort, drive back across town, and watch your billion-dollar investment vaporize your entire career." The sheer audacity of the demand hit him like a physical blow. The blood rushed back to his pale face, fueled by sudden, blinding rage. He slammed his fist down on the glass. "You are completely out of your mind," Braden screamed, spit flying from his lips. "This is blatant corporate extortion. This is industrial sabotage. You deliberately engineered this disaster. I will sue you into the ground. I will have you thrown in federal prison for domestic terrorism before I ever sign a single piece of paper handing my company over to you." I did not blink. I calmly reached over and tapped a single key on my laptop. The high-fidelity speakers in the boardroom suddenly crackled to life, playing a crystal-clear audio recording from the control room. It was Skylar's voice, whining about the legacy systems, followed immediately by Braden's own arrogant voice commanding his incompetent friend to force a hard system reset. I let the audio play out before tapping the key again, bringing up a massive projection on the wall behind me. It was the undeniable, time-stamped digital server log. "Take a very close look at those timestamps, Braden," I instructed coldly. "That is the exact moment your director of flow optimization manually disabled the spatial positioning safety nets, and that is the exact moment you ordered him to sever the power cycle, effectively killing the exhaust fans on the furnace." I was sitting in a public coffee shop with a time-stamped receipt when all of this happened. My hands are completely clean. The federal investigators will look at these server logs. They will look at your idiotic artificial intelligence integration, and they will conclude that this catastrophic failure was the direct result of your own gross, criminal negligence. I did not light the match. I just stepped out of the building before you decided to play with gasoline. He stared at the projection, his jaw hanging completely open. The threat of a lawsuit instantly evaporated, replaced by the crushing, suffocating weight of reality. The digital clock on the boardroom wall ticked loudly. There were exactly 12 minutes left before the internal pressure of the furnace exceeded the structural integrity of the steel housing. Right on cue. Braden's cell phone began to vibrate violently in his pocket. He pulled it out, staring at the caller identification. It was the chairman of his board of directors, calling back to see if the crisis was averted. The phone buzzed relentlessly, an electronic death knell for his ego. 12 minutes, Braden," I reminded him softly. "If you do not sign, the factory explodes, you go to prison, and Helios Tech absorbs your market share anyway. If you do sign, the company survives as a subsidiary of Helios, nobody dies, and you get to walk away without federal handcuffs. Pick up the pen." His hands shook so violently, he could barely uncap the expensive fountain pen I had provided. A choked, pathetic sob escaped his throat as he pressed the nib to the thick paper. He was not just signing away a company, he was signing away his pride, his power, and his entire arrogant worldview. It took him 3 attempts to physically complete his signature on the final page. With that messy, trembling stroke of ink, Aerovitreous Dynamics officially became a subsidiary of Helios Tech, and the contract explicitly named me as the new chief operating officer with absolute, unquestionable authority over the facility. I pulled the documents back across the table. verifying the signature. "We are almost done," I said, looking up at his defeated, hollow eyes. "There is one final verbal addendum to this transition of power. You and your friend Skylar are officially stripped of all executive titles, stock options, and administrative access. However, I am not firing you today." Braden looked up, a tiny, pathetic glimmer of hope flashing in his eyes, perhaps thinking I was offering him a minor consulting role. I crushed that hope instantly. "You are both going to remain on the payroll for exactly 1 month," I continued, my voice dripping with absolute authority. "Every morning at 6 o'clock sharp, the two of you will report to Marcus on the casting floor. You will put on cheap, poorly ventilated safety gear. You will take standard push brooms, and you will manually sweep up every single shard of shattered glass you caused today. If either of you quits, complains, or misses a single shift, I will personally forward the unedited server logs to the Department of Defense and let them handle your criminal negligence charges." Braden just stared at me, completely broken, physically shrinking into his ruined suit. He had absolutely nothing left to say. I smoothly stood up from my leather chair, adjusted my jacket, and snapped my laptop shut with a sharp, decisive click. I looked down at him and offered a cold, triumphant smirk. "Good. Now let us go clean up your garbage." The heavy black sport utility vehicle provided by the Helios Tech executive fleet tore through the front gates of the facility, scattering the perimeter security guards. I stepped out onto the asphalt, and I could feel the ground physically vibrating through the soles of my boots. The entire factory floor was trapped in a mechanical apocalypse. Crimson emergency lights slashed through the thick, hazy air, casting long, nightmarish shadows against the corrugated steel walls. The deafening roar of the compromised furnace sounded like a jet engine preparing to tear itself apart. Time was completely gone. We had mere seconds left. I walked directly through the main doors, moving with a calm, predatory purpose. The local firefighters yelled for me to stop, but I flashed my new Helios executive credentials and kept walking. I ascended the metal staircase to the second-floor control room. When I pushed the heavy door open, Skylar was literally on his knees, weeping into his hands. He looked up at me, his face twisted in absolute terror, begging me with his eyes to do something. I completely ignored his existence. I stepped up to the master terminal. I bypassed his flashy, frozen artificial intelligence monitor entirely. Instead, I reached deep underneath the heavy metal desk, feeling blindly along the primary wiring harness until my fingers brushed against a hidden, analog priority core connection port. It was a physical override switch that neither Braden nor his incompetent friend even knew existed. I pulled my heavy-duty flash drive from my pocket and slammed it into the port. My hands hovered over the physical keyboard for a fraction of a second before my fingers blurred into motion. 5 lightning-fast, deliberate keystrokes. That was all it took. I hit the enter key, manually rebooting the IC protocol. My custom code shot through the central nervous system of the factory like a massive surge of pure electricity. It instantly bypassed all safety locks, aggressively overriding every single line of the garbage artificial intelligence algorithm. The first command I forced through the network targeted the power cycle. I forcibly redirected every available volt of electricity in the building straight into the massive exhaust fans of Furnace 4, pushing them to operate at 150% of their maximum rated capacity. The agonizing, high-pitched shriek of the failing metal furnace suddenly shifted. The heavy fans spun up with a violent roar, sucking the lethal thermal pressure out of the chamber. I watched the main diagnostic monitor as the temperature graph, which had been hovering dangerously past the absolute point of no return, suddenly halted. Then, beautifully and rapidly, the numbers began to plummet. Simultaneously, the second phase of my code hit the factory floor. The blindingly fast data stream restored the spatial positioning matrix. Down below, the 10-ton heavy transport robots instantly recognized the human heat signatures around them. The archaic protection mode was immediately canceled. The massive steel arms powered down, emitting a loud hiss of hydraulic pressure and slowly rolled backward on their linear tracks, clearing a wide, safe path away from the titanium barricade. The heavy steel doors of the makeshift prison swung open. Marcus stepped out first. He was drenched in sweat, covered in industrial dust, but he was entirely unharmed. Over 30 exhausted workers followed him out into the open air of the casting zone. Marcus looked around at the retreating machines. Then he slowly tilted his head back and looked up through the glass of the observation deck. He saw me standing there, my hands resting lightly on the control board. The blaring emergency sirens finally cut off, leaving a ringing silence across the enormous facility. No one said a single word. Then, Marcus stood perfectly straight. He raised his right hand and gave me a single, slow nod of absolute, unwavering respect. A second later, the entire factory floor erupted into deafening, echoing applause. Things look very different around here now. Braden and Skylar did not go to federal prison, but their current reality is arguably worse. If you walk down to the casting floor today, you will see two former corporate elites wearing cheap, poorly ventilated yellow safety suits. They spend 8 hours a day holding plastic dustpans and heavy push brooms, silently sweeping up the endless shards of broken glass under the aggressively strict supervision of Marcus. As for me, I am currently sitting in the massive corner office on the second floor. I have a perfectly brewed hot Americano resting on my pristine desk. I lean back in my chair, looking down through the glass floor, listening to the flawless, rhythmic heartbeat of the giant machines humming below. The factory is singing a perfect, synchronized melody, precisely orchestrated by my commands. Money can buy a lot of things in this world, but a highly complex system never forgets who its true master is. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to today's story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please let me know your city or country in the comments below. As I mentioned earlier, our channel is currently demonetized, so we have absolutely no budget to keep operating. If you felt satisfied with this story and want to help us out, please consider donating just $1. You can scan the PayPal QR code on your screen or use the PayPal link provided in the description and the pinned comment. Your $1 helps pay our dedicated team, feed their families, and ensures we can keep creating high-quality stories for you. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video.